Oh yay, oh yay! Oh, let me take my COVID mask off now for a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, as official town crier for the city of Barrie, I welcome you on a walking tour here at the magnificent Union Cemetery in Barrie. It's a virtual walking tour, and you can join me as I take you around three of the most famous people in the Barrie area and their graves. So here we are with Mr. Robert Simpson's grave, born in Salton, Yorkshire, England on March the 1st, 1817. Then he got on a boat and came to this wonderful country, Canada. What did he do? Well, he came in 1834. He bought a business which was a brewery. Yeah, cool. What did he buy? He bought William Mann's Brewery in 1836. He moved the business to Kempenfelt. It burned down, which a lot of buildings did in the 1800s. They were all made of wood, remember? Then he moved to Tollendale. Oh, it burned down again. Uh-oh. That's the trouble when you're brewing beer. You've got to have fires underneath great cauldrons. Then he moved to Barrie in 1848 and started the Simcoe Steam Brewery on Mary Street. Now, he did very well. You have to remember that you have to think of the people here in Barrie in those days. In the early 1800s, the pioneers, take a look. Railroad men, loggers, farmers. Ooh, about 70% men and only 30% women, for goodness sake. In fact, some of those guys had to write to women and ask them to marry them. And then they came across on boats to do just that. Well, our good friend Robert Simpson was a reeve at first of the county, but then he became the first mayor of the town of Barrie. This is way before we were a city. It was the town of Barrie. He was the mayor from 1871 to 1876. Well, how did you become a mayor in those days? Well, only men allowed to vote. Boo! Wow! Yes, only men in those days. So what have you got? Loggers, farmers, railroad men. Oh! And is it a secret ballot? Heck no! It's an open ballot. You stand in the street and anybody that wants to vote for you stands around you and then they count the heads. Well, guess what? He was a brewer. If I was a railroad man or a logger, I would have voted for Robert Simpson to be mayor too. You got free beer. Oh, yay. So, here we are at the grave site of Olive O'Connor, who was the wonderful wife of Major Earl Franklin Hersey, who's also on this gravestone, as you can see. Now, she was an amazing woman. She was married to him for many years and cared for him. He was one of Barrie's greatest heroes. Well, why? Because when he was a young guy, back in the Army Signal Corps in 1932, he had an amazing team of dogs that pulled his dog sleds. They were a mixture of wolves and regular dogs, dogs, but he crossbred them. Wow! Anyway, he had the fastest dog sled team in the whole of the Yukon. He also was a crack shot, an amazing shot. He was a real marksman. Now, around that time, a naughty boy, a guy started stealing from trappers' traps. Ooh. And a few of the other trappers said, hang on a minute, some of the animals are disappearing out of our traps, and we think this one guy who's a bit of a loner living in that wooden hut over there is the guy who's doing it. So the RCMP went up and knocked on the door of this guy's hut. Well, who was he? He was a guy called Albert Johnson. Oh, so they knocked on the door and said, Mr. Johnson, sir, we think you might have been stealing from other trappers' traps. Is that true? The two RCMP officers listened at the door. The only thing he answered with was a hail of gunfire through the door, which killed one of the RCMP officers. Oh, my goodness me. Constable Miller was killed by Albert Johnson, a crazy mad trapper. So the other RCMP officer ran for his life, jumped on his horse and galloped off to go and get help. A posse was formed of all sorts of volunteers and other members of the military and of the police, one of which was an amazing guy, Earl Franklin Hersey. As a young guy, he said, yeah, I'll bring my dog team and my sled as well, because it's snowing pretty hard. They turned up at Albert Johnson's hut, and he was gone. But they looked down, and there was a track leading off into the forest in the snow with his snowshoes. So off they went to go and hunt him down. He'd killed a brave RCMP officer, for goodness sake. So off they went in the one direction. There was also an aeroplane circling over. That was the first time an aeroplane had been used in a hunt like this. And there was an air race, an amazing guy called May, and they called him Whop May. And he, believe it or not, had actually had a little fracas in the First World War against the Red Baron. But they'd both run out of ammunition and waved to each other and just headed off in their different directions. So he was a pretty good pilot. He radioed down and said, hey, Frank, Earl Hersey, as we called him, Frank, I think that guy's gone a different way to all the other dudes. So he went along the frozen river with his dog sled to see if he could find out where that guy had gone. Well, guess what? Albert Johnson was wearing his snowshoes on backwards. Ha ha! That's why the guys had headed off in that direction. He was clever enough to have put them on backwards to make them all think he'd headed off west, whereas actually he'd gone east into the forest. However, he didn't trick good old Earl Franklin Hersey. He spotted him, but not before Albert Johnson saw him. And Albert Johnson ripped a gun off his back, knelt down and fired several rounds at our poor Frank. One of them hit him in the knee, went up his leg bone, hit his elbow, hit his ribs and bounced off him. Luckily, Frank fell off his sled, which saved his life because the other couple of shots went over his head. Frank then took his backpack off, pulled his regular .303 rifle out and aimed it at Albert Johnson. Boom, boom, boom. The best shot in the regiment. One of the bullets hit Albert Johnson's backpack. Guess what? There was a huge explosion. All the ammo that Johnson had in the backpack exploded and killed the wicked killer Albert Johnson, who had killed the RCMP officer. What May, flying overhead, radioed down to Frank. Are you hurt? Are you hurt? Yeah. Get down here, land on the ice on the Rat River. I've just killed the mad trapper of Rat River. Get down here. I'm bleeding. What May landed his plane, threw Frank in, and also, believe it or not, the body of Albert Johnson in the back too. Off they flew, took him to the nearest place where he could be treated for medical reasons, and he survived. Yeah! Later, Earl Frank Hersey, a hero of Barrie, became a reeve of Simcoe County as well. Amazing guy. Now, his name is on that gravestone along with his wife, who is buried right here. But actually, Frank isn't in there. His name was on the gravestone, but to our knowledge, he was never interned here. Hi there, so here we have the grave of Harry Morrison Leigh, who was the beloved husband of the fabulous lady known as Janet Lindsay King. Now, who was Janet Lindsay King, I hear you say? She was Mackenzie King's younger sister. Oh yes, she was. Her name, Janet Lindsay King, was of course her name before she called herself Janet King Leigh, after she married Harry Morrison Leigh. However, originally they lived in Kitchener, but in the days when it was called Berlin, in 1893, when it was called Berlin, they moved to Toronto. In 1896, her boyfriend, a lovely guy called Bert Harper, who had courted Jeannie, as they called her, for many years, was so in love with her. But he was working in Ottawa, and one day a poor little girl fell through the ice on the Ottawa River, and he ran out to help her and also fell through the ice trying to save her. He grabbed her, but I think because she struggled so much, she drowned them both. Oh, Janet King Leigh, well, Janet Lindsay King at the time, was so sad. She was distraught. She had lost the love of her life. But luckily, she met Harry Morrison Leigh. She met him and married him in 1906. By the way, her previous boyfriend died in 1896. So there was a good few years before she chose her husband. They had 4 or 5 children, we're not quite sure. Maybe 4 lived and maybe 5, maybe 1 had passed, but we know that she had between 4 or 5 children. Her husband died here in 1945. Jeannie carried on living until 1962. And of course, he was very, very famous, was her brother, William Lyon Mackenzie King. He was the 10th Prime Minister of Canada. He served in 1921 to 1948. Wow! He was a Liberal Prime Minister. He was also into spiritualism in some way. It's quite well known that he talked to his dead mother and asked her for her advice from time to time. Anyway, wonderful Jeannie, Janet Lindsay King, was quite the socialite here in Barrie. She was amazing. She would put on all sorts of parties and all sorts of amazing celebrations, and she supported the township of Barrie very, very much. So, have a look here at this gravestone. Look down here. This gentleman here is Stephen G. Mosley, or Mossley, depending how you pronounce it. In England, he'd have probably been called Mosley, but here in North America he was probably called Mossley, Stephen Mosley. Stephen passed away in 2018 on June the 14th, and it was a sad loss for the city of Barrie. Why? Because he was an amazingly talented musician and creator. In June 2018, Barrie lost one of the most talented singer-songwriters that we've ever had. Stephen Mosley was a folk musician, coffee shop owner, music scene founder, and well-known busker who lobbied for the creation of street performer programs here in the city of Barrie. In the 1970s, Stephen was instrumental in establishing the very, very first Barrie Folk Society, and also a songwriter himself. He produced 5 albums, as well as he appeared on CBC radio quite often. Well, could be heard, I guess. You don't appear on the radio, do you? You appear on television, but he did appear on television on several occasions, but on the radio he could be heard on CBC radio. In 2009, an article by the Barrie Examiner said that Stephen was one of Canada's most poetic, romantic and talented songwriters. His legacy lives on in his music and in Barrie's emerging musician program that we have now, thanks to him. So basically he helps people who are young and who are starting off as music performers, some of them street performers, and incubates them into wonderful, wonderful musicians through his legacy of organizing this music building system. He helps and honors and keeps on their career and forwards them into being famous as himself. So let's hear some music from him.
Laden weight my branch to bear, my sails are bent with what hangs there. Your smile, your touch, your countenance, they make the blood in my veins dance. As if our paths had crossed before, our footprints press some distant shore, where we once hovered hand in hand and fell as one on distant sands. And those circumstances upon us are, and come what may, enshrouds our star. Let tongues that would wag what they might, but darling, if I was midnight.
And with that, we finish our tour, and I thank you for joining us. However, before I finish, I want to thank Darren Roscombe, our amazing, talented, wonderful videographer, who because he cares about the history of Barrie and he's very, very socially minded, suggested that we make this virtual tour for people in this time of COVID. Stay safe, girls and boys. Stay safe.